Hello.
Hello.
I am really chuffed to be joined here today by Ben Kellie, the co-founder and CEO of Applied Atomics. Ben has just flown in from Alaska, which we're all very excited about. And we've been talking about his plans for Christmas shopping here in London, which is a bit of a departure from Alaska, but we'll come on to some of that fun stuff. Ben, tell us what Applied Atomics is and why you're building it.
Sure. Applied Atomics is nuclear power plants, co-located fission. The reason we're building it is, and you might think there's 150 other nuclear power startups happening right now. It seems like it's in the zeitgeist. Everybody's doing it. It's gaining a lot of momentum. For us, when we looked at the market, we realized there's a lot of focus on microreactors, but overall across the industry, there's really a focus on new and novel reactor architectures. We think that it's actually a market opportunity to take more understood, higher heritage technologies, vertically integrate those, package those together and get them to market. So briefly, what that means is a lot of other companies are really focused on the reactor, but that's like being focused on the engine of the car. And so, they're raising hundreds of millions of dollars. They're going through all these years. They're developing new fuels, new physics. And then at the end, it's like, and here's your engine. And by the way, and they call it the balance of plant. It's like, build the balance of car yourself, steering wheels, headlights, seats, all of these things are details to us. You go ahead and then get it licensed with the Motor Vehicle Administration and off and running. But that's a lot of work. And what we've realized is our customers, to extend the analogy a little bit, they want to buy cars, they don't want to buy engines. And so in our case, they want to buy power. And so we're building the full stack power plant using well understood reactor technologies and secure supply chains to get to market faster and more economically.
Why is it important to do the design, build, operate right now?
Yeah, great question. I think really because what's wrong in the nuclear industry has a lot less to do with new fuels and new physics, and it has everything to do with cost and deployment. Things take a long time. Nobody's really sure what they'll cost. By vertically integrating, we've built financial models across our engineering department, across our project finance, across all these pieces to say, this is what, power will end up costing. And right now there's error bars on that. And as we progress, we can bring that in, but we're able to identify that from day one. And these are lessons that we learned. My co-founder, Paul, and I were early at SpaceX. Our chief engineer, Chris Newton, was there as well. And that's really what we learned helping the Falcon 9 program on the launch and recovery side. Was that, we had gone to the space station, we had gone to the moon, we knew how to go to outer space. We didn't know how to go repeatably, reliably, on time, on cost. And so what Falcon 9 did really well was integrate the rocket all the way to the launch pad with all the engineers working on that together. And that's what brought down costs and timelines and brought everything together. So that's our focus as well.
I think you've written about the fact that, and this is a quote from you, that the best technology is no good if there isn't the supply chain to support it. You said to me before that the SpaceX rocket, it was old and reliable, and that's exactly what made it scalable. That very much fits with your approach at Applied Atomics. Why aren't more people thinking like this?
That is probably the number one question we get, even from investors, to which I always say, well, call them and ask them, right? It's like, that's nothing to do with me. But I think really it just comes down to experience. I think everybody has watched SpaceX grow and do really amazing things, but we were there and on the inside of that, and we experienced it day to day in our 20s, which is a fairly formative time to be working those sorts of projects. And so we really took away those lessons day to day and said, this is the way that you change a stuck industry. This is the way that you bring new things to bear. You have to have your hands on the control levers of cost and timeline. You have to have really lived something to know it. And we have, worked thousands of hours around the clock on launch pads, on landing pads, building them, going from design to operation. And we know what it takes to do these things. And so I think that's what gives us the perspective. And I'm not sure everybody else has necessarily had those experiences, and certainly not in nuclear, where there hasn't been a lot of new builds for people to learn from. And so it's one of those things that it goes really quickly from being academic to being very, very experiential. And we've just seen this in our careers in hard tech, that there's a lot of really good ideas, and it can be a challenge to actually make them come to fruition. And so we're trying to stack the deck in our favor.
One can make the assertion, and maybe you disagree, but that we have all the technology already available to us and discovered to make a success of the 21st century, to capitalize on superabundance, superintelligence, to be interplanetary. But what we've got is a distribution problem. Do you think that that is the case? And if so, where does it mean we need to focus our energies in energy?
To start framing that, I think energy is what underpins all of these things. And when we get excited about Applied Atomics, it's because everything else we're excited about requires abundant, cheap energy that firm, fixed, always on. And crucially for us, carbon free, and to unlock a lot of the things that we really believe in and are excited about. I wouldn't necessarily go so far to say that we have all the technologies that we need for full superabundance of everything, but I think that we have the foundation of what we need for here on Earth for energy abundance, and I think that it's understood. And so back to your question, I think it's a distribution problem. I think it's an execution problem. I think it's the challenge of how do we build modern infrastructure in the 21st century? What does that mean? It's time for a real kind of renaissance around modern tools, modern approaches to massive infrastructure development. And that's something that personally gets me really excited. And I think that is the key to unlocking, because more than anything, it's about making all the business models fit together. And energy, if it's the foundation, has to be affordable. And that means we have to be very, very good at executing and deploying in order to unlock everything else that we want to up the chain.
What does the world look like when you've succeeded?
I know what our small part of the world looks like. I think that you can start to have conversations about alternative fuels that, fit regionally. So in for instance, maybe in ports or for long distance shipping, hydrogen actually makes a lot of sense. Probably doesn't make a lot of sense for cars. Okay, fine. Battery electrics maybe are the thing that make the most sense for cars. But all of that starts to be able to be carbon free because you're able to have so much energy. And all of a sudden you have enough fuel for, societies and economies to continue at current pace for the next 1,000 years. When energy is no longer a concern, we can start to focus on all the other things that matter to unlock the future. We can start to focus on hyperlocal manufacturing. We can start to focus on how we grow food regionally. We can start to focus on desalination, solving all these other problems that actually come back to energy as their main cost driver and as their main complexity driver. And that's what really makes us focus on what we focus on.
We're still at a point where people don't want nuclear reactors in their back gardens, in their backyards. How do you conceive of the pushback to nuclear as a technology when there's such an education gap and such a gap between kind of what we can do and what stuff actually looks like versus how people perceive it?
I think the first thing we don't do is force a solution on anyone, which we have seen happening a little bit. We focus really hard on education. And so, for instance, I think if the pollution that was coming out of a coal stack wasn't invisible to the naked eye, people might be a little more concerned about what's coming out of those stacks and where it's going and where it's landing and how all of that looks. Truth be told, coal plant spreads more radioactive material than a nuclear power plant does. And the fact is that nuclear power is among the safest power on Earth and has been for a very long time. And so the gap for us is bringing those facts to people and letting people and communities make their own decisions. And we've been working really hard to find communities where people are open to this. We're more industrial focused, co-located focused. So we're not necessarily trying to be a microreactor literally in your back garden, but instead a larger reactor that is driving a chemical plant or driving a data center or driving a large energy park that brings jobs to the region, that brings tax revenue, that brings all these other benefits for people. And so that's part of the whole story we want to tell. I'm from Alaska, and we have a very long history of people showing up and telling us how things are going to be, taking a lot of value and then leaving. And so I'm personally very sensitive to that. And that's something that's very top of the list for us and how we work with communities as partners.
What does that look like on the ground, having nuclear reactor next to a supermarket, next to a data center, in the industrial park in your town? What does that look like for the average person?
I think it looks like a number of things. You can look at it from a jobs point of view. It looks like strong manufacturing jobs coming to town. It looks like great maintenance, great operations jobs being in town, both at the data center as well as at the power plant. It's money flowing into the community through the sale of power. It's stable, lower power costs for the long term for communities. I've studied a bit of the Mesmer plan that France did through the 70s. And there was this pushback where communities were like, well, we don't want these in our community. And they're like, well, here's all the benefits. You can get this tax revenue. You'll be able to build schools. You'll be able to build roads. And all of a sudden, people are fighting to get these into their community. And so we're thinking about how we can do something similar where we're not just taking from the community, but we're giving both power, but we're also finding ways to really invest in the communities through jobs, through revenue, through all of these other programs that make us an actual asset that people want to have around.
If you're dealing with mission critical things like energy, like the provision of public services, you're often in environments and geographies where there's already a lot of stuff in the ground. And that can't be more true than in energy. How easy is it for you, just practically speaking? And what are the implications for where you're focusing as you build out Applied Atomics to go, okay, this is an existing piece of civilization and we're going to insert ourselves into it?
For our applications, we're looking at 15 to 20 acres of space, and so we won't necessarily be like a microreactor where we're coming right in where there's already a lot of infrastructure. We'll be outside town. We'll be in the hinterlands. We'll be building there, and so we think more about ending up in places where we still have access to rail, to roads, but we're not often having to jostle and figure out how to fit into existing layouts and existing infrastructure, because we're going to go set out away from everything and kind of build out and then bring transmission back, or ideally co-locate with some other large installations that also need a lot of space to build.
One of the things that feels like a live issue here in the UK at the moment is working out how best to fund nuclear projects. They're still very large, and as projects are working out how to bring in private capital, you often see kind of not necessarily kooky structures, but structures that are, say, borrowed from the construction industry, where you've got a guaranteed rate of return for early capital in. The issue there is that you've got the government guaranteeing a rate of return for those early investors via taxpayer pounds or dollars, and you've got the government also determining when ground gets broken. So it's this kind of like layering up of government discretion and then guaranteed payments that are kind of at the mercy of that. It's kind of hard to know how better you could structure something when the scale of these projects is as they currently are. But it also feels really suboptimal, and like we're still in the kind of like foothills of working out how to fund some of this stuff. We're big believers at Basis in kind of taking a big thing and making it smaller in order to reinvent it, to make it more efficient, and to move it away from the kind of like hyper centralization that can make things expensive, inefficient, and have poorer outcomes for end users. I think that plays very well with what Applied Atomics is living and breathing. And I wonder what your thoughts are there on kind of how we should conceive of nuclear projects. They're really big versus like what we can do moving forward, and those inherent tensions.
Yeah. I think you're right that when we look at the really large grid scale projects, that it's been challenging to fund, and that has a lot to do with the track record of those not necessarily coming out on time, which adds to the cost of financing, because now you've delayed, you need that longer, you're paying it without revenue longer. It literally compounds in those cases. And that's a real problem that needs to be solved and figured out. I think, though, that when we think about scaling these technologies down, a lesson we learned in aerospace is a pound weighs more on a small rocket. If you add 5 pounds to Falcon 9, it doesn't even notice. I had clients with these very small launch vehicles that we would say, hey, we need to change this thing. It's going to add maybe a half pound. And they would lose their minds, right? Because that proportionally represents a meaningful chunk to them in their mass budget. And so how that ties to your question is, as we go to smaller technologies, a 10 megawatt or 1 megawatt turbine and generator set is not 10% or 1% respectively of the cost of our 100 megawatt turbine and generator set. And so that's just economy of scale. And so you end up with power that is more expensive for this smaller thing, because the pieces cost more for what they can output, and you're making less power to recoup those costs. And so moving up the scale can help with the actual cost of power, but then at the far end, you run into these issues with financing that you're talking about. And I think there's a real tension there. And I think we're figuring out how to navigate that. We don't know the answer yet. We have banks lined up ready for 2, 3, 4, all the way to N, private capital, everybody very excited to take a return on those. The way you finance the first one is going to be different. It's going to be a little bit heavier on equipment financing, on equity within the company, and on other pieces that we can bring in that are maybe higher tolerance risk capital. But the advantage for us is that once you unlock that first one, the financing for others becomes a lot easier, because we literally have the model and we're replicating what we do. But I do think that there's a really interesting question to be explored, and something that we are going to discover on our journey, which is how are we deploying infrastructure in the 21st century? What does that look like? And I think in deep tech, we spend a lot of time looking at the technology piece, but we need to think a lot about project finance, about underwriting. Nobody's talking about insurance. Nobody's talking about site selection. Nobody's talking about how that and project finance, all three interact with each other. Finding credit-worthy off-takers that can underwrite your project. All of those are such massive pieces of the puzzle that we have to figure out. And we're working really hard on that, and we've unlocked a lot. But I think that what's really exciting about the 21st century is how we get back to building infrastructure in a new way. And I think those kind of pieces that maybe are on the margin or in the shadows or aren't considered sexy or interesting are the pieces that are actually going to drive the most change.
VC can fund the V1 for something like applied atomics, but it can't do it when we're doing nuclear at the scale that we're currently doing it.
Yeah, venture capital should literally help us go and venture to our first of a kind plant. That being said, we won't use VC entirely for the first of a kind plant. There's a lot of other pieces of capital and debt and grants that we can bring in. But yes, well said. Like it's for getting to the first, giving a return to that asset class, and then figuring out how we go and deploy long term and bring in other types of capital.
Feels like we're at a bit of an inception point where we've got a resurgence of private solutions, private capital coming quite noisily into the energy market. Who's responsible for energy and energy security?
It can be different for everybody, right? Certainly what is right in the UK is not probably right in West Virginia versus Colorado. The U.S. is so diverse. I mean, if you look at the Texas energy market, completely different from every other part of the grid. And so what we need to get to are a collaboration rather than a competition. I think people are seeing private solutions in competition with what they perceive as government solutions. But in my conception of it is more that we're a private company that can bring a solution, and we should be working with local governments, local municipalities, all the way up to the federal government that is, regulating the interties and regulating power going into the grid and finding a way to do that collaboratively.
Everything flows from energy, our productivity, our progress. And yet, if you were to get somebody in power, as in governmental power, rather than your kind of power, talking about the importance of maintaining the grid, of making necessary upgrades, it'd be an immediate switch off. Why is that? What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the truth of the matter is the grid is an amazing machine in all of our modern countries, and it's something we never think about until it goes out. And it so rarely goes out that we don't really think about it at all. And so nobody's running on that issue, even though it is something that deserves a lot of attention, because 95% of the public thinks that power is something that comes out of the wall. And if you ran on something as niche and esoteric as grid reform, it would just put everybody to sleep. Nobody would listen. You couldn't possibly win. And so it's one of these kind of sticky infrastructure problems where it is something that we really need to figure out how to modernize and how to work on. But it takes massive amounts of money, but it's not going to have a showy result. People's lives are just going to continue to be on, and maybe it's more efficient, maybe it's more resilient, but they're not really seeing the effect of that. And that just makes it a really, really tough thing to push reform on.
We also have the upstream issue of having hollowed out manufacturing and broader state capacity across the West over the past few decades, which makes it very difficult to move in a dynamic way on some of that infrastructure updating as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely it does. I mean, it's also in the US especially, it can be a challenge just of access to labor. People who are qualified to go and build those new transmission lines, upgrade transmission, do smart interconnects, meter between different stations. All of that is really, really clever stuff. But beyond the willpower, we often struggle with the labor pool to go and actually execute on it.
What was it like working at SpaceX?
It was a great way to spend my 20s. It was hectic, right? It was everything you've heard that it was. It's a very different company now. I was there maybe, I don't remember exactly. It's going to sound like a lot, maybe 1,200 people, but they're much, much larger now. I was kind of on a small startup within the company is how we like to think of it, building the West Coast launch pad, Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. And we were taking an old Titan pad and converting it over to Falcon 9. And so there was like 6 engineers on the pad team and working day to day. And we had dozens and dozens of technicians. And what was really powerful about it was that experience of going from blank sheet of paper to, tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of deployed infrastructure in the field, and then operating that. I became lead engineer for the first launch out of that pad, getting the rocket from the hangar to the pad, setting it up. But yeah, I mean, I also worked 7 days a week, 12 minimum, 14, sometimes 17. I worked 26 hours straight a few times. Like I remember being there just a lot, and it takes its toll, and you have more access to real hands-on experience there than anywhere else, I think.
People sometimes sort of lament the fact that there's just one Elon, that there aren't hundreds, that our progress is kind of, so capped as a species that, there's just this one dude and there's not hundreds of people doing the same, kind of incredible things. It's this inordinate amount of human capital and expertise and time and energy that goes into the things where the rest of us just see the snazzy outcome. Mm-hmm. So do you think that's a valid kind of gripe about the world to have? Is actually that kind of like real-time great man scenario kind of how you'd see it naturally shaking out anyway, because it just takes a huge amount?
Elon is very good at a lot of things, but I mean, the other side of the SpaceX coin is like, it is a very high personal life toll, right? And so it's just something where it does look very snazzy. Something I've tried to communicate a lot is like, everybody's like, oh, I really want to be a part of that. And it's like, not everybody really does, right? And so there is a trade-off. I mean, I think something we're exploring within Applied Atomics quite a bit is like, how do you get those results, but how do you also be like human focused? For better or for worse, Elon is not a human focused person, right? Like all the kind of famous stories of like walking past somebody's computer, looking down and being like, what are you working on? You're fired, get out. Like all of that is very true. Like squeezing people very, very tightly to get what he wants. All of that is the other side of that coin. And we're trying to figure out, what does it look like to try to take the middle path and straddle both. And that's a challenge, but that's like an exciting part of the company building challenge as well. And so I guess to your core question, I think everybody has within them the ability to be great, whatever that means to them for their given context, their abilities, their passions. I would love it if every single person on this earth was just like consumed with and had the courage for the passions that like definitely live inside them, and that I think a lot of us spend a lot of time trying to ignore or put down or put off to the future. I think what we've all experienced in that company and in the adventurous sense is like, you have to have the courage to like go for the things that you really believe in and work really hard, but then simultaneously have the resilience to pivot when the universe says, well, like your idea is crap and you need to try a little bit different or a little bit better. And that is really tough. People either get discouraged when their dreams don't immediately work out, or they keep chasing this insane dream forever. And you've got to like kind of navigate both. And I think that's the art. Working for Elon at SpaceX taught me a lot about the face of a company and versus, the people that actually make it up. And I worked with some of the most talented, kind, humble, brilliant people that I've ever met in my life, two of which I'm still working with today, 15 years later. And a half dozen others are all investors in our company. And we built really strong bonds and we pushed really hard because we got over these massive obstacles that other people thought at the time were impossible. Nobody was landing rockets, right? But it also taught me a lot about the fact that one person can't do everything. It takes a massive company of very, very talented people to get anything actually done. And I think that that's something that I'm carrying forward in this company.
How do you think about vision and leadership, though? Because I suppose that's the sexy side of what we all think about when we think about Elon Musk. How do you would you take away from that as a leader and CEO now?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about, I don't know if it's lead from the front. So when I was on the barge, I bought a picnic table at the hardware store and put it in the middle of the barge and had a Verizon hotspot and a computer. And the technicians would be working on things. Designs would come in from Hawthorne all the way across the country. I would do the math, fix the designs, change them to make them work within the context of our project. And then about every hour I would stand up and do a lap around the barge and stop at each technician and ask them like, what do you need? Why are you stuck? What is broken? What's wrong? And it could be everything from like, my family misses me. I've been away too long. I need to go home. Okay, go away, right? Go see your family, go rest, go relax, come back. Hey, I'm out of like one day, I'm out of paint. Okay. We didn't have any interns. I drove to the hardware store. I got them paint because it's about keeping the team moving. And so for me, I think of myself as somebody that is there to unblock problems. I often joke like the job of the CEO is to just eat garbage all day long. It's like just because everybody's like, bring me your problems, let me unblock them, let me solve them. But I'm to want to build teams that are just like highly collaborative, highly focused. I always say like very low ego, very high ability, and are there to like get the job done. And so really for me, it's about coming up with a vision, putting that out into a strategy that can be articulated and communicated, getting people excited about that, and then knocking down all the blockers to that and letting them run. I don't want to be the bottleneck. I don't want to be the top where every decision flows through me. I want to hire the people that are able to make the decisions, back that up with analysis, and go. Because I remember when I was building my last company, when we got like our first couple engineers in, nothing felt better than knowing like this is getting done without me involved. That was just such a great feeling. And so just like multiplying that and scaling that is a big part of how I think about it.
What are the other habits, routines that you have baked into day-to-day life that allow you to succeed?
I think one of the biggest ones, especially as I get older, is just like long walks / morning meditation. I think it's really easy to become reactive to the inbox, reactive to all the other messages flowing in, reactive to the demands of others. I think I learned a long time ago, it's like your inbox is a to-do list somebody else makes for you. And so, getting away from that, because the job really is unblocking and the job really is setting strategy and storytelling. I think of myself almost as like chief storyteller more than anything else to all of our various stakeholders. I think for me, the ebb and the flow is really important. And so the biggest part of the routine is getting that quiet time. I'm not a big hacks guy. I don't have any like crazy shortcuts or hacks. I just really try to like have a clean body, have a clean mind, and show up as well as I can within the process, because everything is filtered through my nervous system. And so the way I react has to be measured and balanced if I want the results to be measured and balanced.
How does someone know when they're doing their greatest work?
I think it's different in every season. My dad got very sick when I was in graduate school, brain cancer, and ultimately passed away. And he was very adamant that I stay at school and focus on my studies. And I was very adamant that I come home and help out. And finally, towards the end, I did do that. And I remember I'm so grateful to my alma mater, Ohio State, where I got my master's degree, because I like tried to walk in and quit. And they're just like, wait, why are you quitting? And I explained, like, why don't you just go home and take care of your family and come back when you're ready? And that was like the greatest gift at the time. And so for a while there, it was only a few weeks that I was home really helping at the end. But like my greatest work was very, very simple, right? But I think it's when you are kind of waking up in the morning and kind of popping off the mattress. And I think it's when it's your feeling, not somebody else's, I think is what I'm trying to get at. When I was at SpaceX, I didn't always feel that I was doing my greatest work. There was times, sure, there was moments when I was like, this is the most amazing thing in the world. But there was also voices just like, hey, this is not right for you forever. This isn't going to fit long term. This is a season. And, I think when we think about our greatest work, it does change season to season, but it can't be other people telling you like, oh man, it's so cool that you land rockets and you do this thing. Like that's ego. And that'll drive you a certain way, but like eventually you get in conflict with your own inner guidance that's trying to pull you towards something more interesting. And so I had an early mentor that told me like, you'll never find exactly what you want to do. You'll just keep crossing off what you don't want to do. And I feel maybe that way about greatest work. Your greatest work will change time to time, and you'll think you're on your greatest work, and then you'll find something else. And hopefully life can just be a series of like greatest to greatest, right? Like, I mean, obviously the way my dad's story ended was very sad, but I felt like a lot of honor and happiness that I could be there with him. And like my greatest work now is raising my children, right? Even running a venture-backed company, that is the most important thing to me. And so I think it changes, and I think it's almost ineffable. Maybe that's why I'm struggling so much. But you can feel when you're not in your greatest work, and so maybe keep searching until you find something else.
Why selling power?
Why selling power? Well, two reasons. One, again, just back to the basic thing. Energy is the basis of everything, and we need more power. And we need it to be carbon-free and affordable. So that's the biggest reason. Everything else we're excited about unlocks when we unlock this. But the second reason, from a specific business model point of view, is that our markets are all recurring revenue. And so if you look at the SMR market, I think it's like just shy of 7 billion total addressable market. And it's like, okay, versus we're looking at a total addressable market of 100 to 120 billion per year in power sales. It's just like order of magnitude difference on the number, but also on the fact that it's recurring per year, which leads to everything else we've talked about on the financing side. And so those are the two biggest reasons that drive us.
You were at SpaceX, you're a lead engineer working on Falcon 9. Now you're running Applied Atomics. Give us the potted history. What's your career been to date?
Yeah, sure. So was lead engineer for the West Coast launch pad of SpaceX, went on and did the landing barges, which are the vessels we tow out into the ocean and they land the rocket on and we tow it back. Did the early days of that and some of the first landing missions at sea. After that, I moved to Alaska, which is where I was born and raised, and I started a company called The Launch Company. We designed and built spaceports and test ports for venture-backed rocket companies around the U.S. We also built flight hardware in the form of small fueling fittings that went on rockets for putting on gases, for putting on fuels, for putting on everything that they need to operate the vehicle. And we also put those on satellites. And so we ended up, we bootstrapped the entire company, took no investor money, just ran on revenue, and we bootstrapped hardware to space, which I think is pretty cool. And then I sold that to a company called Voyager Space in 2021. Stayed on for a couple of years and left in 2023. And then I did a 2-year sabbatical, which brings us up to this year.
Tell us about the sabbatical.
The sabbatical was right after I left Launch Company, and it was a challenge in that I had not taken any real time off. I mean, I'd been working since I was 14. and so I guess that made it about 20 years of just working. I paid my own way through college. I worked both undergrad and grad school. And so I was just always at work. And the silence was deafening, right? Like, I was just like reaching for my phone all the time. And then I think I had done just enough, maybe like training on presence and meditation to be like, well, this is a problem. And so it just became a place of like complete reset. And my wife, Jenny, was really funny because I would sit down to read a book and I would just fall asleep. And she would come and shake me. She's like, hey, like, go upstairs, go take like a real nap. I'm like, no. I'm laying on the couch. And then I'd wake up 4 hours later. So I'd sleep from like 3 to 7 every day for weeks. And then wake up, I'd eat dinner. And then I would go upstairs and go to bed and I'd sleep for 8 hours, which is crazy. And my body was just like, went into repair mode. And so I didn't know if I was ever going to stop sleeping, but it was like 3 months of just like total catch up. And I started getting more into training, and I just really enjoyed it. I got back to writing. I love to write. And I started working on my Substack a lot more, which has suffered now that I'm doing a startup again. But it was a really lovely time. And I really focused a lot on therapy. I focused a lot on meditation and long walks, connecting with the family, because I wanted to deal with that intervening 20 years, that previous 20 years of everything that I'd put off, including the passing of my father, that I'd never really dealt with properly. It was a really introspective period that's probably interesting to nobody except me, but I think that it was like very, very important because it let me reset into a new season, into kind of a new way of thinking, and take ownership of myself and say, okay, these are the things I'm interested in. This is the way I'm interested in showing up in the world, and these are the ways I can be helpful and be of service. And that becomes the basis for how you move forward. And that's just made me feel a lot more grounded in this new phase. I don't feel like I'm flailing or looking for meaning or, trying to prove my ego or any of those sorts of things. I feel a lot more at peace.
What are your hopes and fears for the future of space travel?
My biggest hope for the future of space travel is nuclear thermal propulsion, which is NTPs, essentially a great way to move from one planetary body to another. And I would love to see those kind of actually launching and become used. My greatest fear is over-rotating on the everybody's going to live on Mars thing. Earth rocks, and Mars is a great goal for a lot of reasons. But I think that what it takes to actually go there and fully habitate it and make it livable is so large and so daunting that we need to be level-headed about the way we do it and not rush into it, or we could be setting ourselves up for a lot of disappointment. And so I'm a big proponent of going to the moon first. if I was going to climb Everest, I would probably climb a few other lesser mountains nearby just to try my gear and make sure I had things figured out. 3-day rescue window instead of waiting for transfer orbits to line up. I think there's a lot of advantages to getting smart. That being said, I see Mars as a great goal. I think there's a lot of interesting science we can do there. But I certainly don't think we'll be living there in the 2030s. And I think it would be foolish for us to over-rotate on that.
If you had a magic wand, what company would you conjure into existence tomorrow that wasn't Applied Atomics?
That wasn't Applied Atomics. Wow. I thought of 4 things, I guess. I thought of immediately of housing, I thought of future of farming, I thought of desalination, and I thought of alternative fuels in the sense of how are we going to solve air transit? How are we going to solve long distance shipping is like 2 really big things that need to be unlocked.
You mentioned you've been working since you were 14. What was happening when you were 14?
I had a few odd jobs. Later in my teens, I worked on the docks, bringing in fish so the boats would come in, we'd bring up these huge brailers full of salmon. We would sort all the salmon, we'd go to the cannery and process it. That was very hard work. Or literally around the clock, we'd sleep for a few hours in the back of like a little hatchback, like a Geo Metro, like still in our like rubber over, like bibs and stuff. And we stunk and it was awful. But you're 16, you don't even notice.
Yeah.
You don't even notice. I learned a lot about, I guess, discipline. I learned a lot about maybe the value of $1. and I started thinking a lot about like, how could it become maybe a little easier to get some of these dollars? Because I was making maybe 6 of them an hour. And so that led to, thinking really hard about college. But I also worked for a long time. My family had a small air cargo company. So we flew groceries, fuel, building supplies to Alaskan villages off the road system. So we served an area, as big as most of the American Midwest by airplane, flying over mountains and glaciers and all the cool things and landing in very small communities and dropping off these really critical supplies. And I think that is what taught me about service. Nobody is happier to see you than when you show up after a blizzard with food. They're just like, how are you? They're just like thrilled. And that is a good feeling. And I that's something I've never been able to like really replicate, to be honest, since it ended after my dad passed.
It sounds like you had a good instinct, like even then, for that balance between, I'm not being lazy, this just isn't for me, or I'm understanding from this thing that to get from A to B, I need to go and do something else. Is there anything that you would say to yourself 20 years ago where perhaps you didn't kind of intuit that something would be as it panned out?
I think the thing I would say to myself is like, trust the intuition, because I did have that intuition, but I spent way too long trying to prove myself to other people whose opinions like do not matter. It's like, in the words of the Big Lebowski, it's like your opinion, man. It's just, it's not real. And I spent too much time letting other people's opinions drive what I chose. And that's what led to a lot of the uncomfortable parts of life that I needed to change or that didn't fit. My personal kind of motto is I'm dumb, but I'm not stupid, which means like, I'm not very clever. I'll goof a lot of things up, but I'm not stupid enough to like goof them up forever. And so like, I do learn from it. And I would just tell myself to like, trust that intuition and trust that process.
We often end up talking on basis points about university being a scam or it not being something that allows someone to optimize for their skills or just get on with building. I'm imagining you might have a slightly different take on it to that. So great to hear your thoughts.
I think I have a blended take. I think if we are just observers to our own lives, then it's bad. So if you're going to university and you're just sitting still and nodding for 4 years and passing all the little tests, then like you're probably not going to be thrilled with the outcome. I squeaked by with a 3.51, but I did a bunch of projects. I like wrote grants. I built a wind turbine for rural Alaska that you could go and get parts out of like the local scrapyard to build your own wind turbine, make your own energy. I was on the rocket team and I got to fly on the Vomit Comet and like test a CubeSat in like simulated microgravity. And my grades suffered a little bit because I was having so much fun doing projects, which again is a signal I was doing the right things because I was genuinely interested. I think the key is to be a true participant in your own experience, whatever those experiences are. show up and be a part of it. And if you don't want to be there, then back to the other part is like, then don't be there. Go do something else, right? It's like your one wild, free, and precious life. Go and make the most of it and do something that you enjoy and is like renewing and generative for you, right? That's engaging, that you're into. And the one piece of advice I would give to young entrepreneurs at the risk of being prescriptive is like getting some experience within another company, even if you hate it, is really beneficial because now you have an opinion and now you've seen how things are done versus having some very like fresh and new concept of how every single thing will be. I promise you it's not original. Like we've all thought of like these things and we've all thought of these things like, oh, this is the most clever thing ever. And you go out in the world and it's like, oh, 50 other people thought of that this year alone. It's rare to have a truly original thought. And so going out and getting experience and reacting to that experience, I think is the biggest piece. Don't just sit in your apartment trying to think of the next great big idea all day. Like get out there and interact with life and learn some lessons and react to those things and build from there. I will say what ultimately got me hired at SpaceX was the projects I did in college because they're looking at all these young people coming out. There's something like, this is an old stat now, so it may be more, 100,000 new mechanical engineering grads hitting the market every year. So what are you doing to stand out against that? We've all taken the same classes. Usually doesn't matter on the university. They're the same books. Like we all learn the same stuff. So like, who are you as a person? Like, what do you care about? Why did you do this? What are you interested in? That shows up through the projects you do outside. For SpaceX, what stood out was they were like, wait, you guys designed a wind turbine that could be built out of spare parts? I was like, yeah. And they're like, and then who built it? We're like, well, we built it. And then we tested it. And they were like, oh, you went from concept to reality through tests. Like, that's what we have to do here. And that's how they were able to build confidence, like, oh, this guy could fit into what we do here. It's not prescriptive advice. Like the job market is a lot different now and things are really challenging. But I think there are still people looking for those that can stand out and can prove. And worst case scenario, yeah, go do something crazy. But I can't tell you how many people I interviewed from very well-known schools that didn't do any of those things and just were like, oh yeah, I'm this person. I have a very fancy degree. Please hire me. And we're like, I don't know if you're going to fit in here.
Pays to be a serious person, doesn't it?
It pays to be a passionate person. Being serious helps. I've been accused of being too serious a few times, but like
I've never been accused of being too serious.
Well, good for you. I think that pays, right? Like just being passionate about something. Like have an opinion, go find out if it's real, have the courage to change your opinion if it's not, and just be passionate. I'm on a bit of a tear here, but like I think it is hard to be a passionate person because it's almost like being earnest is cringy or like looked down upon. It's so risky to like be vulnerable and show up and be passionate. I'm sure there's people who hear me say this that are like rolling their eyes, but it's like, whatever, man. Like that's part of like learning to be yourself and like, what do you believe in and what are you excited about? Like go full speed.
Ben, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time.
Yeah.
If people want to find out more about you, about Applied Atomics, they can go and read your Substack. And there's also stuff on Applied Atomics' website, I think.
Absolutely.
You can have a little read of, which is fantastic. Where can they go? And is there anyone in particular you would like to be speaking to right now?
So we have a Substack both for Applied Atomics. I also have a personal one. And you can always read more on our website. In particular, we're always interested in talking to people that need energy. We're looking for people that are potentially remanufacturing or building out energy sites, and we would love to talk to anybody in Europe or the US or beyond.
Thank you so much, and enjoy doing your Christmas shopping in London.
I will. Thanks so much for having me. This was great.